In the summer 2015 issue of World Policy Journal, we published our first work of fiction, China's Smoke-Smothered Sky by Qiu Xiaolong. The story focuses on the politics of pollution in China today.
And this morning, the author has joined us to discuss his work in more depth. Thank you again for joining us, Mr. Qiu.
Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. We'd like to start by asking you what inspired you to write the story, and also a little bit about the documentary it's based on.
Well, I have been interested in the environmental issue for a long time. Several years ago, I wrote a book titled Don't Cry Tai Lake. And that's about the pollution of Tai Lake. I went to Wuxi, where the Tai Lake is, and did research and write book. And it also has quite a lot to do with my frequent trip back to China because the air quality is so bad. Almost every time I got back there, I got something like flu, had to go to hospital. So I'm worried about that. So when I saw the documentary, and it's not just me, a lot of people, are concerned about this issue in China. And also my American friends, my friends from other countries, if they are staying in China, they're also worried about that. So we've been talking quite a lot about that. But the situation in China is something you cannot really talk. So that is why when this documentary came out, I was so excited. I saw it several times. I recommend to my friends not in China, and everybody was excited. But then so dramatically after a few days, it was suddenly banned. And of course, at first I was surprised. Why? Suddenly this can be shown, right? It's a surprise. But then a few days later, it was banned. That's another surprise. And then, of course, I did some research trying to find out why, and that's how I started, thinking about writing something about it.
So how have you seen China's approach to environmental issues change over the past few years, or has it been changing at all?
Yes, it has been changing, but I would say not enough. Just like, this documentary, that initially it was allowed to air, right? That itself is change. I mean, let's say 5 or 10 years ago, you would not have imagined that. And also this documentary was made with personal money. It's not like in China 5 or 10 years ago, any movie, documentary you have to make with the government approval first. But this one was made with private money. It was shown. And it was controversial in less than a week. Millions and millions of people have seen it. So that shows it has changed. But at the same time, just less than a week, it was banned. So that is not changed. So since in China, it's always like you can see from that perspective, you can see from this perspective. So it's very complicated.
Why do you think the government originally accepted her documentary into the public sphere, but then censored it later on?
There are a lot of interpretations about why and how. One thing I read online was, to begin with, Chai Jing did a good job. Okay, so, and he got help from a lot of people. So possibly not too much people know about the documentary beforehand. But I don't think, the government will be like kept in the dark before, the documentary will show. So some people must know in the government. Now, according to one interpretation, I think it was first said by a UK newspaper, because the documentary criticized some official in the China petroleum industry because they cause pollution. They try to, gain profit at whatever cost. Now, these officials happen to be associated with Zhou Yongtang, the biggest Chinese party official, fell recently. So they think, documentary can serve that purpose, right? These are bad guys. So now we are fighting against corruption, and so that will make some people happy. So they allow that. But as soon as it was shown, online, so many people, millions and millions of people watched that. And they also realized, well, maybe that's too much for the government image. So again, they changed mind and they banned that. But of course, there are some other interpretations.
How has your work been received in China?
Some of my books have been translated and published in China, but with a lot of changes. Like Shanghai, the censorship official says, no, you cannot have that. You cannot let story happen in Shanghai. So they change Shanghai to H city. They use English letter H. And of course, a lot of paragraph sentence they just cut. And without getting my permission or even letting me know. So that's why after a few books, I was angry. I said, no, I don't want, have my book published, because sometimes, the Chinese reader said to me, why you write this kind of book? I said, it's not my book, right? The change is such a lot. And some book, even with change and cuts, it's cannot be published. Like Don't Cry Thai Lake. So I don't even try to say to Chinese publisher, because I know it cannot be published.
Along the same lines, what role do you think fiction can play in environmental activism?
Well, actually, Cai Jing's documentary could be one example. Of course, you can read, in books or online, a lot of things about, environment issue, disaster in China, right? But none of them can be so effective, because this academic book can be so difficult to read, right? Not too many people will read it. And with documentary, people watch a movie at the same time learn something. And so that's why very effective and reach large audience. And I believe fiction work in the same way, because as I know, in a lot of American universities, my inspection books are used as textbooks. And these professor, history professor, sociology professor, or professor interested in environmental issue told me, because this way people are interested in the issue more easily, right? They don't have to read all the academic paper or books. They can read a novel at the same time so vividly. They learn the issue. And then if they want, they will start read academic papers. So I think that's another reason I was so interested in that documentary, because it's kind of work in the same way. It's kind of entertaining and easy to follow, but at the same time, it does not mean it's shallow, right? It can be deep, it can thought-provoking, it can make people to read more to raise a question. And I hope my book works this way. And I just want to add, Don't Cry Thai Lake, the book about the China environmental disaster, is shortlisted for the international award in Italy. So I'm going there in November.
We're so happy to have your story in our summer issue on climate. Is there anything that you hope to accomplish specifically by bringing this story to World Policy Journal's readers?
Actually, it's the first time for me. I always wrote novels rather than short stories. So I'm really happy because I want, my story, as I mentioned earlier, not only just fiction, okay? It's about China policy and the Chinese government, all these kind of things. So I want my book to have, readers in all fields of life. So that's something I'm really happy about it. Yeah. And I want to thank the editors. They contact me. Okay, you can write a story. So at the first I was surprised. How can I write a story for the magazine like this? But I think it works out. Actually, I got several contacts about one is from Italy. They really want to translate this into Italian language. And of course, a UCLA professor already planning to use the story in her coursework, I think in the fall. So yeah, so this means it's like it reach different people, and I'm happy about that.
For those of you who haven't read the story China's Smoke-Smothered Sky, it's in our summer 2015 issue of World Policy Journal. Qiu Xiaolong, 谢谢你, thank you.
谢谢你。